2022 Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to ask for patience as we conduct our virtual meeting. There may be slight delays as we transition between speakers' presentations and participants. If any participants have issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator, Ray. We have 3 committee reports and 4 other discussion items on our agenda today. As usual, I would ask for a focus with each discussion to allow us to get through the entire agenda. I would ask commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments. Finally, please be recognized by the chairperson before speaking. We start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. I believe that we may have members of the public signed up to speak today.
Yes, we have Speaker Jennifer Irving Cockman.
Hello.
Good
Go
morning.
ahead, Jennifer.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for letting me speak. I'm commenting today on the proposed text changes to the Live Work ACU ordinance that the text change committee has been diligently working on. TC 1221 with new text changes would actually allow for almost any type of commercial business to operate in residentially zoned neighborhoods by expanding the list. And this expanded list actually includes, I found out, the retail sale of alcohol, tobacco, and vaping products, which are illegal for the city to regulate, as well as firearms and guns in residential neighborhoods where children live, which actually says it all to me. Also adding eating establishments to the list was intended by the city to encourage, quote, fresh and healthy foods on the website, but the website also states that residential zoning means that the city cannot guarantee fresh and healthy foods. So I would say if it's a moot point, could we please just delete that? Also, doing away with special use permits means that commercial businesses will be able to operate without approval from the city, which means without any input at all from staff, neighbors, evidentiary hearings, or the Board of Adjustment. And it'll actually be harder to get a permit for a standard backyard fence, which took me 3 weeks, than it would be to open a business, restaurant, or store on your property. Businesses will no longer be required to offer parking for their employees or for their customers, despite the competition for on-street parking downtown, despite public permits which don't guarantee parking, and they can operate from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. 7 days a week. Most neighbors I know complain about leaf blowers operating at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, so I can only imagine the noise complaints that this will generate for the city. I urge you to reconsider these text changes to TC 1221, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Moderator, do we have any other members of the public signed up for general public comment?
No, that's it.
Okay, excellent. Going to move forward to committee reports. The Strategic Planning Committee met on January 13th and has a few items to report out to the full commission. The first item is item C.1, crime as related to housing type. This was a topic that was referred to the committee at the October 12, 2021 Planning Commission meeting after a member of the public provided a comment and expressed the opinion that multifamily housing types are correlated to increased crime rates. The committee reviewed information provided by the Raleigh Police Department and a peer-reviewed research article studying this topic. The committee reports out this item as information with no recommendation and notes that there's no empirical evidence to support the claim that new multifamily housing causes an increase in crime. Committee Chair Lampman, do you have anything to add?
I do not. That was a great summary. Thank you.
Excellent. Moving on to item C.2, which are outstanding agenda items. The Strategic Planning Committee would like to report out a series of items with no recommendation. These 3 items were referred by a previous Planning Commission, and the members who requested these items are no longer on the Planning Commission. Additional information is provided in the agenda materials. Committee Chair Lampman, would you like to add anything?
I would not. We've had a wonderful conversation over the past year. I look forward to more. If anybody has any other recommendations for future topics, please feel free to reach out.
Moving on to item C.3, which is TC 1221, accessory commercial units. This is a city-initiated request to amend Part 10 of the Unified Development Ordinance to add accessory commercial unit as a use. The committee discussed the item at its December 6, 2021 and January 18, 2022 meetings, where a series of revisions to the draft ordinance were proposed. Additionally, the Text Change Committee voted to request a 45-day extension, moving the deadline for Planning Commission action from February 4th to March 21. Committee Chair Miller, do you have anything to add?
I think that's a good summary, and our speaker today, Ms. Kochman, highlighted sort of the complicated different factors that are going into this discussion, which highlight the need for an additional 45-day extension to review this in committee. So with that, I'd like to make a motion to request an additional 45-day extension to our deadline for action with respect to TC 1221.
Excellent. And do we have a second? Commissioner Dattell?
Second.
Right. Because this is not the final disposition of the case, we will vote by a show of hands for the extension for 45 days to TC 1221. By show of hands, those in support of a 45-day extension? Okay. And any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to old business. There is one item listed under the old business portion of the agenda today. This item has been previously discussed and we have received presentations and heard from the public. So we will begin with a short update from staff focusing on the revisions to the request. In summary, item D.1, case number TCZ 5821, is a request to amend the zoning conditions for a 3.2 acre portion of the Falls Ridge Plan Development. The case was discussed at our January 11th meeting, where it was deferred to allow time for the applicant to offer conditions addressing building height near the adjacent residential. I'd like to start with the staff update from Hannah Reckow.
Good morning. Give it a moment for the presentation to come up. So as was mentioned, the case TCZ 5821, the applicant has added one additional zoning condition. You can go to the next slide, see the summary of that. So the existing conditions all remained the same. So we go to the next slide. And to see the sixth condition, which states that buildings located within a corner of the parcel adjacent to Coxendale Drive shall be no more than 3 stories and 50 feet in height. The revised master plan also includes a diagram that illustrates that area. Go to the next slide to see that. It is the area highlighted in yellow on this. You can see it's along the Coxendale Drive frontage and down to the eastern part of the site. So the only other note I wanted to make as an update, go forward maybe 3 slides, is in the consistency analysis. There is one condition, rather policy, building height transitions, that the last time I provided a presentation the request was inconsistent with. This amended condition that limits height adjacent residential area across the street makes the request consistent with this policy. So that is the only change in the policy analysis. And again, your deadline for action is March 12th. There are a couple meetings in February between that time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Reckow. We've already heard from the applicant team, so I would like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments at this time? Okay, seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion. Commissioner O'Haver?
Sorry, I did have a question, quick question, Chair Fox. I assume the UDO, the 50-foot height is consistent with 3 stories in the UDO, correct?
That is correct. 3-story height limit, it aligns with 50 feet.
Great, thank you so much.
Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? I believe I saw another hand. Would someone like to start with a motion? Commissioner Rains.
Thanks, Chair Fox. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated January 25th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval for the zoning amendment for text change TCZ 5821. The action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because the request would allow additional housing units to be located on the site and would also allow non-residential uses, including neighborhood service, retail, personal service, and offices, potentially shortening or reducing vehicle trips and addition employment locations in the immediate vicinity.
Thank you. Commissioner Rains has offered a motion to recommend approval of TCZ 5821. Do we have a second? Commissioner Dattel?
Second.
With that, is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Good morning. Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dattel?
Aye.
Commissioner Elder?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Godinez?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
And Commissioner Rains?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to new business, these requests have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, and we will hear a full staff presentation and applicant presentation for each. Item E.1 is case number Z6620 or TCZ 420. This is a request to amend the zoning conditions for a 13.38 acre portion of the Crabtree Village Plan Development on the block bounded by Homewood Banks Drive, Blue Ridge Road, and Crabtree Valley Avenue. I'd like to start with a staff presentation from Ira Mabel.
Good morning, Planning Commission. Right as Chair Fox just said, this is an amendment to an existing plan development or PD. The applicant has submitted a site plan concurrently with this, which is a bit unusual for us, not our standard practice, but is sort of a pilot program we've done a couple of times. So a lot of the PD documents are much more detailed than other plan developments. And those documents show a 160 unit senior living facility, although there is entitlement in the PD for more than that. So I will go through, next slide, a little bit for everyone, like I do for every plan development. A PD is a special zoning district that allows an applicant to submit alternatives to certain sections of the UDO, and those can be less restrictive. And in exchange for that, we get more detail up front, and in the form of master plan and narrative, and also plan sheets showing some minimum requirements, such as building layout, stormwater, utilities, etc. And like I said, this time the PD documentation was as detailed as a site plan is typically, and they got some reviews from site plan reviewers that don't normally look at a rezoning PD. Next slide is the list of the parts of the UDO they can change. And next slide, can you keep going? So this is what was phases 2 and 3 of the Crabtree Valley PD Phase 1 is already developed as the mark at Crabtree, which you can see on the slide there as those named streets just to the south. So that exists and was built per the Phase 1 standards. Next slide. This is an overview of the site, so you can see Crabtree Valley Mall there. So this is just to the south of that. And some of the surrounding development pretty close to the 440 interchange with Glenwood Avenue. Next slide. This is basically what the proposed change to the master plan is covering. So the remainder of what's known as Kids Hill that is left that was not already developed as the mark at Crabtree. Next slide. Just a bit of history. This PD was originally from 2012, and then around 2014, the Phase 1 was constructed. There was a previous TCZ in 2020. So the UDO allows some specified changes to a master plan that can be approved administratively. So which does not require rezoning. That is, you can move your building, the site of your building by some number of feet. You can go 10% above and below, your proposed residential density, et cetera. But any major changes do need to go through rezoning. And so that's what happened in 2020. There was a new site plan and a couple other changes that, I don't want to say were minor, but were certainly not the scope of the changes that are proposed for this TCC. So next slide. So the master plan, this request is not asking to change the entitlement. The unbuilt phases allow what you see on the screen here: 232 dwelling units, some retail, hotel rooms. Like I said, the site plan they submitted does show 162 multifamily units in a 6-story building, but they can go up to 200 feet by right in the master plan. Next slide. So the changes that are included in this request, so in the backup, I included the red line, which shows the changes that are proposed here versus the most recent version. So that was from 2020. But I did not show the site plan. I just included the site plan that they're proposing today. So that brand new building layouts, driveways, parking locations, et cetera. A really small change to the cap for retail. And then some rewording. This developer is planning to construct the rest of the PD as one phase. So they did sort of clean up all the language that talked about multiple phases to make that more clear for future reviewer and posterity, really. Next slide. This is the layout. So there's the main central building with a courtyard surrounded by surface parking. There is access from a private drive to the south that exists already, and then they're proposing a new drive that goes to Homewood Banks there on the west side. Next slide, please. I'm going to keep going through proposed changes to the PD. So they removed some standards that were in the old narrative regarding building materials, outdoor lighting, seating, et cetera. So that's not a UDO standard, but was in the original PD that they removed. They're proposing some alternatives to the UDO. So change to the parking ratio or a reduction in parking minimums, allowing a higher retaining wall than normal. There is quite a bit of grade, as you saw from the aerial, and specifying some monument signs, so a little bit different than the UDO require. Next slide. There's been quite a lengthy conversation with transportation staff for various parts of this PD throughout the site plan review. So I did want to just give a little bit of context so that y'all could understand really what a little bit better, more clearly. So there's some removal of language that was in the 2012 PD talking about infrastructure improvements, right-of-way improvements, really replaced with statements that says that the developer of phase 1 has already done all that stuff. So really just clarifying that everything that would be requested by the city according to the 2012 documents has been done already. So next slide. And just the sort of, genesis of the staff concerns from Transportation Department. To my knowledge, really the far and away the biggest concern has to do with this intersection, Crabtree Valley Avenue and Homeward Banks Drive. So I did want to provide a little bit more context of why that is the case. So it is a 4-way intersection with 5 or 6 bus lines that pass through it, going to a transit hub in the mall, and also crossed by a greenway, the Crabtree Greenway, which we're about to sort of invest relatively heavily. There's a project mentioned in the report that is going to put a grade separated crossing on Blue Ridge, but is not proposing any changes here. So there's just a lot of stuff going on, I think. And, just basically an intersection with a lot of movements, a lot of modes, and no signal currently, and no plans from the city or funding from the city, I believe right now, for any signal. Next slide. This does score fairly highly on the, like I say, it is next to a transit hub, so it scores pretty highly on that. Really close to retail and jobs in, all the stuff around the Crabtree Valley Mall. Next slide. Yeah, walking distance of transit is for relatively small multifamily units, etc. Next slide. And relatively little to say about the land use history. It has there has been stuff on this hill. There was a restaurant that some long-term Raleigheites might remember, but other than that, has been mostly undeveloped. Next slide. The request is consistent with the regional mixed use designation on the future land use map. So that includes, does include entitlement for commercial, a hotel, other stuff. But all that is envisioned in the RMU category. Next slide, please. Inconsistent with the urban format. So the city growth center, the urban thoroughfare designations, not so much the transit emphasis corridor, but the other ones certainly point towards a frontage. And there is no frontage reference in the base district. Frontages did not exist in 2012 and one was not added here. And generally the site design is not really what's envisioned by the frontages recommended by this plan. I will say, this is, like you saw, going to be a pretty grade separated development related to both Homewood Banks and Crabtree Valley Avenue. So I don't know if any zoning would really make it more walkable than what they're showing, just because, there's theoretically any development of the site will go at the top of the hill and the sidewalks along Homewood Banks and Crabtree Valley will be at the bottom of the hill. So inconsistent with that plan, but it seems like a stretch for me to call basically any alternative think that would be super consistent anyhow. Just want to point that out. Next slide. But it's consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. Next slide. And consistent policies about the types of development we want to see in the mixed use center designation, and compatible infill. Next slide. Inconsistent with the couple of transportation policies, and that's really in reference to the language that's specifically saying there will be no more improvements. And then there are a couple of policies in the Crabtree area plan, one that says Kids Hill should not be graded, which this plan certainly is proposing, and another one talking about design unity, which is really about the removal of those design standards from the existing PD. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, staff has concerns. We do have a representative on the line should there be any questions, and I believe between the two of us we'll try to do our best to answer if there are any. And your deadline is in March. So I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Ira. Next, we will hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. I'm Isabel Maddox here today on behalf of owner Welltower and developers Terwilliger Pappas and Pappas Properties. On the line with me today are Tom Barker of Terwilliger Pappas, Tom Walsh of Pappas Properties, David Brown, landscape architect of Klein Design, Travis Flewitt, traffic engineer of Kimley Horn, and Rob Caudle, engineer for Withers and Ravenel. This case is an amendment to an existing master plan for Crabtree Village. We're seeking approval for approximately 160 senior targeted apartments on lots 2 and 3 of Crabtree Village. If you'll go to the next slide, you can see where those 2 lots are. You see the overall, and then go to the next slide and you'll see lots 2 and 3. Lot 1 was developed as the Mark Apartments, which is phase 1 of the master plan. Lot 4 is the open space lot, which has stormwater facilities, open space, greenway, tree conservation. In some ways, this is a complicated case. It's an amendment to a master plan originally approved in 2005, actually, redone and approved again in 12, amended in 2013, and revised and reapproved again in 2020. But in other ways, it's really simple. We simply need to change the attached site plan to accommodate our development, which is actually a significant reduction in density. So a little background on PD's master plans. It used to be that when you left the PD approval meeting, you walked out with not only approved zoning, but also an approved site plan. But since the UDO was adopted in 2013, somehow the city got away from that. And so now you might get a PD zoning, which would be required to have a site plan or layout attached, but you can't deviate from that other than the very de minimis deviations. And you would have to still go through the ASR process, which would take another year or so, and you might have a risk of it not being approved. And in 2020, this exact thing happened. A revision to the zoning was approved with a site layout attached. And go to the next slide, please. One more, please. Maybe one more. Yeah, that site plan was attached in 2020, but it includes something that the city plant transportation staff was not willing to approve. It was the driveway access to Homewood Banks. You can see in the sort of southwest corner of the plan. That location was not approved by the city. So right now we have a zoning with a drawing attached, which we can't deviate from, but we can't get approved. So fortunately, our current case, the city has allowed us to proceed with both the rezoning and the ASR process concurrently. And as our site plan is teed up and it's really very close to being approved, the zoning does have to be approved first, and then the site plan can be approved. And we propose in that plan 160 age-targeted units. Next slide, we show a rendered site plan. Now that one, we show the access point in the same location as the prior plan. That has been moved, and you see the red arrow. So it's been moved up a little bit on Homewood Banks. Next slide, please, which is the actual site plan. You can see where the access point has been moved. And that has, after many months of discussion with transportation, that has been agreed. But we haven't resolved all issues with DOT. We're reducing the number of units by over 35% and reducing vehicle traffic even more because it is a senior project. The city has suggested we may need to add a traffic signal at the intersection of Crabtree Valley Avenue and Homewood Banks. But we don't believe the staff has properly analyzed the need for that. And in fact, we think the plan documents from 2012 make it clear that all transportation improvements, and there were many of those, were required to be done and actually done back in 2014 when this was developed. So I want to call on David Brown, our landscape architect, to discuss a little history here, the timing of those transportation improvements. And then I want to go to Travis Flewitt to talk about the analysis of a traffic signal. David?
Good morning. This is David Brown. To follow up on Isabel's request, this PD case was initially filed in 2005, a really ambitious plan. It also was substantially reduced in 2012. But going back to the original language, the city of Raleigh very wisely required the developer of phase one to implement all of the public improvements along all three streets fronting the property. There was a laundry list. There were about 10 items. It's in the staff report, those improvements or fee in lieu payments. And it was a requirement that these things be in place, paid, or a surety in place prior to receiving building permit. Obviously, phase one was constructed. The expectation on the part of the developer in the city is that those payments were made in full. I think the understanding right now is there's a question if whether the signal, the pedestrian signal commitment at Crabtree, Valley Avenue, and Homewood Banks was in that fee in lieu payment. That's still an open question. I think we may also want to hear from staff a little bit more on that. I'm going to turn this over to Travis, be available if there are any additional questions or follow-up. And Travis, thank you.
Good morning, Travis Blue with Kinley Horn. Staff has noted the potential need for a signal at that intersection based on crash history. While I have not done a full crash analysis at that intersection, I did go on the Raleigh PD crash database back in September to pull the crashes that were reported at that intersection. I was only able to find 5 crashes over a 2.5-year period at that intersection. However, the manual on uniform traffic control devices thresholds for installing a signal based on a crash history is 5 correctable crashes over a 12-month period. So based on the data I was able to find, it falls short of that threshold. Perhaps staff has more or better data available, but we have not seen it yet. This intersection is also not likely to meet signal warrants based on volumes. A signal was not required of the Crabtree Lakeside Apartments development back when that was approved 2016, 2017. I performed that TIA and a signal was not required with that development. And projecting those volumes ahead to the future and including this proposed development, it is unlikely the signal will be warranted based on volumes at build out of this project either. So since all the improvements were done for this development, it kind of begs the question of why additional improvements should be required now if our entitlement is not increasing what was included in the original TIA for this development back in 2012. And I will turn it back over to Isabel. Glad to answer any questions.
So just to wrap up, although the traffic signal is a main outstanding issue here, I do want to touch on a few other minor issues. The lack of a frontage in the city growth area and along an urban front thoroughfare. As Ira pointed out, this was initially developed before frontages came into play, and it was not envisioned at the outset. Also, the only real frontage that this particular project has on lots 2 and 3 is on Homewood Banks. As serious grade going up from the street, which exceeds the grade, the slope. There's an exemption for a build to in the UDO for slopes over 25%. These slopes are over 25%, so we would be exempted from any build to requirements anyway. Also, there are a few things about outdoor lighting and seating. Those are addressed adequately in the UDO, but they don't need special provisions here. So back to our transportation issues, it's our strong position that when this master plan was approved in 2012, it was clear that the developer would do many transportation improvements and pay in fees in lieu as calculated by the city and collected by the city. But those were all to be done before building permits were issued for phase 1. That was very clear. The city did, in fact, pay a fee in lieu of at least $181,000 in 2013, as the city asked in charge. So we have had some clarifying sentences to make it clear that some of the things talked about in the original master plan document have already been done. It's not like we're coming here and saying we don't want to do any safety provisions. We're just saying that those were required earlier and they have been done. And it should be noted that when this was done in 2012 and the traffic improvements were slated, the intensity of this project was huge. I mean, it had 250,000 of office, 500 and some residential, 200 room hotel. Now, this entitlement is technically, theoretically still there, but since you have to attach a site plan, the one we have attached to complete the development of Crabtree Village is 160 residential units. So really, we can't really go to that heavy intensity as was envisioned in 2012. So I think it's important in terms of trying to add additional traffic improvements or transportation improvements now. So in conclusion, I think I want to say that, this is consistent with the future land use map, consistent with the comprehensive plan. We believe it's compatible with the neighborhood. And the only inconsistency is the frontage, and we would be exempted there because of steep slopes. And we think this is ready for approval, and we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Maddox. I'd like to verify with the moderator that no one is signed up to speak on this item from the public.
No signups.
Okay. So now I'd like to open up for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any members of the commission have any questions or comments? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you, Chair Fox. I'd like to hear from transportation staff about, I'm trying to understand why there is this concern on their part if the applicant is saying they did what they were required to do for phase one. I just want to hear more about what the concern is from transportation.
Good morning, Commissioner Bennett. I'm with Transportation. Sure, I'll be happy to speak to that. From the transportation staff's perspective, we have spent a lot of time looking through documentation and trying to figure out exactly what happened here. And we have not found any clear agreement or documentation that all right-of-way improvements were completed with phase one. So we simply don't have documentation to confirm that. There's a very clear recommendation in the master plan or commitment in the master plan for a crossing at the intersection in question. So when the concurrent ASR came in, staff made the comment asking how the crossing was being addressed. Really, the heart of this is the pedestrian crossing. Ultimately, staff believes a signal is appropriate to make that a safe crossing. But the comment really started at, the master plan calls for a crossing. How are you addressing that commitment master plan? And, at that point, the applicant submitted a revision in the language to say that everything had been done in phase one. So we appreciate that work has been done to date, but we just don't see documentation that that particular item has been addressed. And we are aware that fees in lieu have been paid, and staff's understanding is that those were for frontage improvements, not for this pedestrian crossing.
Okay,
to follow up briefly, apologies, Commissioner Bennett. Ms. Conlon, do we have documentation of exactly what those payments were for, what that fee in lieu payment covered?
We have receipts for that, and it's not as clear as we would like it to be on the receipt. So our interpretation of that receipt is that it was for frontage improvements.
Would a frontage improvement, is that just the 8-foot sidewalk that was required on the Homewood Drive side? That Homewood Banks frontage?
I'm going to check in with our development review staff because I don't want to misspeak on that. I believe it may have been on multiple frontages. I will have an answer in the next couple minutes.
Thank you. Did I see another hand pop up? Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Dattels?
Thanks, Chair Fox. Yeah, I was just curious. I think the applicant maybe mentioned it briefly, but I'm wondering if they could elaborate a little bit on why the design requirements and lighting requirements are also being removed as a part of this change? I might have missed it, but.
Is the applicant available?
Yeah, can we refer to David Brown on that?
Good morning again.
Good morning.
The reason with this project started in 2005 with the pre-UDO, pre-2030 comp plan, with the adoption of the UDO, a lot of those elements that we're talking about, such as site lighting, were more strongly defined and regulated by the UDO. Looking at the differences between what was in the PD booklet as specific to the site and what the UDO required, there wasn't a lot of change or difference. And it's really just that the UDO caught up with what we had proposed, I think, in 2005 initially. I don't know if that fully answers.
Thanks. Yeah, that clarifies the lighting portion, but seemed like there was a portion of it that was talking about like exterior materials of buildings. I don't know if that's related to the UDO as well.
It's certainly my experience working with the city over the last several years that we've had a shift away from regulating building materials in most zoning cases. And we were just catching up the language in this PD to current trends and thinking.
Thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? I have one, David, while you're still on the line. It's related to the height of retaining walls. So I understand in the PD language, this is a deviation from what's permissible per code to have retaining walls that are a little bit taller than we would generally allow. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, and we were also building on some of the language in the 2020 case by a previous applicant. This site has a topographic challenge. There are going to be retaining walls, I think, if anybody develops the site. We have a custom vegetative buffer written for this site to soften the appearance of the walls from the street. We're still proposing to step the walls. We have multiple walls to help break down the mass of them. So I think we're certainly meeting or exceeding the intent of the UDO base language, but we custom tailored it for the specifics of this site.
And even with those larger retaining walls, can you talk me through pedestrian connections to the greenway?
Yes, there's a requirement of all properties to provide an accessible route from the entry of a building to the public right-of-way. It was mentioned that there is an existing driveway from phase 1 to Blue Ridge Road. That is an accessible route that this site will have access to. There's cross access between phase 1 and phase 2. There's a second driveway, I shall say an initial driveway on Homewood Bank serving phase 1 that residents of phase 2 could utilize. I think critically, we are also creating a circuitous but very friendly, accessible route from phase 2 down to Homewood Banks Drive. It's an engineering marvel on the part of our engineer. It's brings you to that 8-foot sidewalk that's on Homewood Banks Drive. That sidewalk will eventually, and the one on Blue Ridge, take you to the House Creek Greenway. So there is an accessible route to the Greenway, if that's kind of a long answer. Sorry.
Yes, no, thank you. That's helpful. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner O'Haver?
Just a follow up on that, Chair Fox, while David's still on the line. I think the wall issue, we can tackle the transportation one. I think the wall issue is just kind of where I was left a little bit. And David, you said that y'all put in some specific language about screening and buffering. Can you point that out to me? Staff didn't cover that, and I'm in this master plan document, which is extensive Can you show me where that explicitly is? I assumed it was in buffering and landscaping, but I don't see it in section 6.
It is in there. This is going to take a second maybe to wander through. And Isabel, if you get there before me, please chime in.
Okay.
Do you have any, let me put, so we're not just a bunch of people waiting on the line while we're reading through this legal document. Is there any opposition to including, or maybe that information is on the attached site plan? I think that would make it a lot easier to understand what y'all are proposing to show that graphically like you've done on other things versus in text.
We could go back to the site plan slide just to help us discuss this.
And the plantings are shown in the ASR submittal, Brian, if that would be of any assistance.
Well, it is kind of confusing because I know we're currently going through ASR, but we're trying to get the zoning to match. So if it's shown on the ASR, I would think you wouldn't have any issue in putting it in the zoning document as well, unless some of my other esteemed colleagues tell me that there's no need to do that.
And I would say to that, that given that we're locked into this site plan, we can deviate by slight amounts. I don't think you're gonna, it's very likely that somebody comes in and does something that's not consistent with this site plan.
And Brian, the language you're looking for is conveniently buried under parking structures, phase 2, section F, at the very bottom of that heading. And it was, I think, added there as talking about screening, either of retaining wall or parking structure.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. Thank you, David.
Yep.
And Madam Chair, could I, oh, sorry.
Go right ahead.
I just wanted to add a couple things in response to staff comments. There's not a specific express agreement to do a pedestrian crossing signal at the intersection of Homewood and Crabtree Valley Avenue. There are some general comments about safety and connections. If a connection, any kind of improvements are built, they'll be ADA compliant. But there's not an express commitment to do it. This is stated in a more general way. And then it's clearly stated that all traffic and transportation improvements will be done in phase 1 before building permits, and the city could dictate those. And finally, there are specific sentences that are in the 2020 approved plan that said there will be no transportation improvements in phases 2 and 3. So that's said in here in our revision, we underscore some of that just because, you know, there's a little bit of murkiness there, but I think it just shows that there's a clear intent to get all those done up front and not to have any further transportation improvements in successive phases. And I think you can analyze this traffic signal either by does that text require it? I don't think it does. And well, if you just looked at this as a standalone basis, how would you analyze the need for a traffic signal? And you could look at traffic trips. You've heard from our transportation engineer, we don't meet that threshold, we don't think. And you could look at safety, and from the data we've reviewed, it doesn't appear that the safety issue is there to require a signal there.
Thank you. I did see a hand, but quickly, a question for staff. The applicant is currently going through a site plan review right now. Have there been comments on that site plan review related to specific transportation improvements?
This is Ira Mabel. Yeah, I can. From my memory, without the site plan comments in front of me, there definitely were. I think the reason that some of the language that staff is now concerned about was not included in the original application. It was included after there were rounds from site plan reviewers asking to show improvements. So we'll answer this question, if I may, if you don't mind, Chair, a little bit more long than you might expect. So I don't dispute at all that the 2012 master plan called for specific transportation improvements. The TIA says that this intersection we're talking about will have a stop sign. It very explicitly does not show a signal. I don't think anyone from the city side is arguing that previous developers did not do what was clearly written. I think they did do that, and the applicant has provided some evidence of fees in lieu for some things, which I have no reason to doubt. I think where we start to disagree is the claim that that was all that the city could ever ask for or ever would have expected. So there's three parts to a PD. There's the TIA, which I think, like I said, shows specific improvements, which I think they completed. There's the site plan, which just shows, the buildings and tree conservation, et cetera, et cetera. And there's the narrative, which describes certain things that are different from the EDO and not able to be shown on a site plan. Some things are redundant and shown on both. And so I think that's the question. The disagreement is, would the city have ever expected additional transportation improvements in later phases? The applicant is claiming that the answer to that is no. I think staff thinks that we probably could have. I think there's, on page 7 was language that was listing specifically for this intersection improvements such as the things that were in the TIA, and then other language talking about we provided per the recommendation of the city or NCDOT. That's removed here. The developer will provide traffic control devices. Nothing says they will provide what is shown only on phase 1. I think it is fairly common for people to leave their future phases flexible should they change, and for staff to expect that flexibility to result in maybe improvements that are, or requirements that are slightly different. So I think that is the dispute. I don't think anyone's disputing that they didn't do what they promised in 2012. The question is, would they have been required to do more? Now, normally, there's other, sorry, Isabel, I have a couple more points. There's other stuff going to, like the Crabtree Valley Small Area Plan, which I believe was adopted in 2002, says there should be a ped bridge to the mark at Crabtree from the mall. So like, what else was going on that the city was expecting to happen? Now, I didn't cite that policy for this case because I think it's a little bit unfair to hold them accountable for infrastructure that clearly would require pedestrian public improvement. But were the reviewers in 2012 expecting a city project to install a ped bridge? I don't know the answer to that. Now, normally, you all would not be subject to this discussion. I would say this will happen at time of site plan, and we will have this discussion privately, so to speak. And it could very well be that, the applicant would make all these claims, and ultimately we would have to agree with them and say, you're right. The zoning administrator would interpret something and we would be unable to ask for anything else. That's entirely possible to happen. In this particular case, because they are amending the PD, that will, I think, most likely, and I'm not the attorney or the zoning administrator, but that probably won't happen. I think this PD includes language that it very, very clearly says they won't have to do anything. And so the site plan reviewer will be unable to require them to do anything. So unfortunately, this discussion, or not unfortunately, but atypically, this discussion is happening today, where normally I would tell you to ignore this because we'll have this talk at the time of site plan. But that is not going to be possible, we think, which is why transportation staff wanted to make sure to raise it as an issue. Now, like I say, it could very well be that if this weren't a PD, we would be having these talks and Isabel and David would be making their cases, and staff would have to agree with them at some point too. The site plan reviewers would be convinced. I don't know if that's the case, but if this PD is approved as written, we'll never know if that's the case. We sort of have to do that now.
Thank you, Ira. That's helpful. I did see a hand, but quick question to the applicant. You had indicated that there were not comments received to date from your the ASR process that would lead you to believe you would have to do significant transportation improvements. Is that correct?
Again, I'm going to have to refer to David on that. I'm not clear what you're saying. There will be the normal site plan type improvements. David, can you speak to that a little bit better?
Sure. I think in the very first ASR review, the transportation comments included a question and a request for more information about Crabtree Valley Avenue, dimensional features. And there was that we actually had a meeting back in May to sort of sound out what might be involved. There was also a question about the driveway that lines up with the hotel across the street. That turned into a very long effort working together, and we found a new location for that driveway. And of course, the third item is this pedestrian crossing at Homewood Banks and Crabtree Valley Avenue. So very clearly early on, transportation did have comments.
Were one of those comments, David, to install a signal or a PED signal?
I think there was a request to explore that. I think, our client's position has been, I think they've already addressed that in their fee in lieu payment. Certainly that was, I think, where we left it.
Okay.
I don't know that it ever came to, here's the exact plan and this is what we want to install. It was.
Question to the applicant, Ms. Maddox. Would the applicant be amenable to removing the statement that no further transportation improvements would be completed as part of this project, acknowledging that that is not a requirement to do any of them? It's just removing that restriction that's currently there.
Well, there's already a restriction there that says no transportation improvements in phase 2, no transportation improvements in phase 3. Yeah, I mean, I feel like what we're looking at here is we believe it was done and it was required to be done on the front end. So we're trying to make that clear that there's nothing going forward. So we would certainly consider that, but I think that's a big part of what we've been saying is that we want to make it clear that those improvements have been done and are not required to be done. And particularly when you consider that the huge amount of entitlement and expectation that was in place when the transportation improvements were considered. And now we're dropping it down to a small fraction of that. We just don't really think it's appropriate at this juncture to say, hey, put a traffic signal in, which is going to be at least $200,000, maybe double that. I mean, we don't know because we don't know what the nature of that signal is, but I feel like that provides a really open-ended thing, and we're locking it down pretty tightly with this site plan. So yeah, I mean, certainly we'll talk about it again, Chair Fox. I don't know that I can agree to that right now.
I saw another hand up. Was there a question, Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. There's obviously some sort of, I guess, not meeting of the minds, I guess, between transportation and the applicant, and we're in the middle. My position is I'm going to err on the side that makes me comfortable, and that's the side of safety. I cannot, in good conscience, recommend approval of something that transportation staff is saying they have concerns about and that we have is inconsistent with Vision Zero. I can't, it's going to have to be clarified for me to recommend approval of this. Whether it's, I mean, I don't really care whose favor it's clarified, whose favor it goes to, but it just needs to be clarified. I can't approve this or recommend approval as it is right now if transportation staff has safety concerns. I mean, I understand this could be additional cost to the developer. That's certainly a consideration, but if they're saying there could be safety impacts to people, that outweighs that for me. So I can't approve this without further clarification.
Thank you. That's helpful, Commissioner Bennett. Commissioner Rains, I saw your hand as well.
Thanks, Chair Fox. Just to follow up on something that you said and Commissioner Haver said on the retaining walls. I'm looking at the site plan that was submitted, and it looks like there's some plantings that face Homewood Banks Road. And then there's on the east side a proposed tree conservation area. But the walls facing the corner seem to be blank of landscaping, and I just wanted to ask the applicant if there's possibility or opportunity to soften that edge facing the corner with additional landscaping. And maybe that also goes to the staff if anything can be altered at this point. I'm not sure of this process, this pilot program process. So does that make sense?
Yep. Is staff available to answer that question about changing provisions for plantings along the Crabtree Valley Avenue side?
This is Ira Mabel. I don't know if any staff on the call right now. I guess that would probably most likely be a forestry question. I will say, I was looking, I did not attach the full site plan submittal for you all. I pulled up the pieces that satisfy the PD requirements, and that was really just because the full set of documentation is quite long and rather detailed. There is a landscaping plan that does show plantings on Homewood Banks between the retaining wall and the sidewalk. Maybe David can answer that question if he's muted. But
Yeah.
I have to admit, I was opening that document while you were speaking, Commissioner Rains, so maybe if you could repeat to me again what you're asking for.
Yes, sorry. On, let's see, the submitted sheet, LP1 is the landscape plan, and it looks like we have blank walls, retaining walls facing a significant portion of the corner between the tree conservation area and the plantings along Homewood Banks Road. And the question was, is it possible to request a study or opportunity to have that wall with plantings to soften that edge facing the corner?
I see.
And I think David Brown may be able to answer that question.
Thank you, Isabella. Dean, the language in the PD booklet is also following the UDO. It talks about walls within 30 feet of a public right-of-way. We have that condition on Homewood Banks. You're absolutely correct. The walls facing Crabtree Valley Avenue are further back, so we didn't show those plantings on our code minimum planting plan. That's just our policy. I think most consultants only provide the code required plantings to keep it sorted on what is in the city requirements. I am happy to take your suggestion and comment and meet with our client. There certainly is an intent to landscape those walls facing Crabtree Valley Avenue. They're just not regulated by either the UDO or the PD. And we can get back to you on that.
Thank you.
So it sounds like there might be an opportunity for the applicant to work with transportation staff a little bit further to refine their understanding of what's required. And also the applicant might consider additional landscaping along the Crabtree Valley corner. Commissioner O'Haver?
Thanks, Chair Fox. Getting back to the transportation and the safety issue, I don't think any of us want to recommend something that's not going to be safe. Did I understand from both transportation staff and the consultant that the TIA does not currently warrant that, and just as importantly, without this development, the city has not prioritized this intersection? Did I get both of those statements correct?
I think so.
I can, this is Ann Conlon again. Yeah, the TIA did not show a signal at the intersection. That is correct. Transportation is actually currently looking at a new crash warrant analysis due to some updated NCDOT standards, but it's not currently funded by the city.
And thank you, Ann. And then also, I'm not sure if we have someone on staff that can answer this, but aren't there some significant improvements? I think Ira mentioned this sort of above grade crossing, but aren't there also some significant sewer improvements and other right-of-way improvements that are going to be that are planned for Crabtree Valley Avenue that is going to tear this whole area up in the next certain amount of time? Am I accurate in saying that?
Yes, I think you are. We met with City Public Works last week or Friday, I think, to go over the Crabtree Interceptor project, which they basically say Crabtree Valley Avenue will be closed for an extended period of time while they install those improvements, which will require them going on this property and obviously all along Crabtree Valley Avenue.
And when was that, Ms. Maddox?
Well, we met with them last week, but this is coming up. I mean, they thought that the construction could start as early as this summer or summer of 2022, or maybe fall of 2022.
Yeah, Commissioner.
Uh-huh.
Oh, Commissioner Hager, just to,
Yeah.
if I may, sorry to interrupt you.
No, sir, please.
For your first question, I agree. The TIA does not show anything that the developer has not done already for this intersection. I don't think saying that transportation staff or the city has not placed a priority on this intersection is quite right. We have not funded anything.
Okay.
But I think the safety at this intersection has been a concern. Transportation staff will tell you for a number of years. And then to your second question, there are three major infrastructure improvements going on here. One is a widening of Blue Ridge Road, which will involve turning that into a full complete street. Another is a grade separation of the greenway that crosses Blue Ridge Road. And then the third is, like you were mentioning, a sewers project on Crabtree Valley Avenue. Now that will close Crabtree Valley Avenue, but that project currently does not have funding to make any improvements. So that street will be returned to the same state it is today. Transportation staff would have loved for that project to have additional funding to include improvements, but it did not.
So, and thank you for that clarification, or I guess that sort of enhanced answer, Ira. I wonder if there, with all the improvements that are going on, with some of the reassessment of the TIA, with some confusion around what is and what isn't already paid for fee in lieu, is there some sort of in between that can occur now that the applicant would be willing to help with, i.e. maybe at least some high vis crossing signs or something that is going to be torn up in the near future? But if the city hasn't funded a project here, but is concerned about safety, if this developer or applicant wasn't coming in, it doesn't sound like there'd be any improvements to that intersection either, regardless of the concern by staff. And so since it sounds like the applicant is open and amenable to making some adjustments, might that be something that can improve the safety here, not ask unwarranted amount of commitment to the applicant, not knowing the future conditions of a whole lot of area, but still, to Ms. Bennett's concern, and I think to all of our concern, improve the safety in that area. It's a thought.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Haver. I think we would certainly consider and probably agree to signage to enhance safety there, subject to whatever requirements there are in signage. But I guess we can do safety signs that the city authorizes. So I think that would be something we would be amenable to, yes.
Ms. Maddox, while we have you on the line, from a timing perspective, how much time would you need to coordinate with staff? And then I'll have staff also answer this question.
Well, that's a great question. We have been talking with staff about this issue for months, but we had a specific request into staff as of the middle of December, which we haven't heard a response on yet. So, I mean, I think our team is ready to be on it really quickly and consider these various things, and would ask that you bring it back in 2 weeks if that's sort of where you're headed. We don't think we need an extended period of time to discuss and consider these issues.
Thank you. Would staff be able to answer a question about timing? I also want to make sure that we are well within the deadline for this particular case.
This is Ira. I will try. I am not transportation staff, so ultimately, I'm not the one who's raising the concerns. I think if it helps the commission, I don't think transportation staff is expecting this applicant at rezoning to commit to, a traffic signal or necessarily even other improvements. I did look up the original ASR comment, and it cited the language that I think is non-specific. So I think they did do all the specific requirements, and there was non-specific language about other requirements as recommended. And the comment from the ASR reviewer was, please show me what you're doing. And so I believe, to speak on behalf of transportation staff, the fear is that there's language in the plan that will prevent them from answering this question. At the time of final site plan approval. They are cautious, I think, at this point to make a firm commitment to what would be required because the rezoning is not approved. I mean, we're sort of in a bit of a catch-22 where development services staff generally is fairly cautious when there's something in flux that is a legislative approval, and committing, to what is required necessarily. So I don't know if there will ever be an answer from the city, which I understand this is frustrating for the commission and the applicant. Like, at this stage, yes, we would be able to require a traffic signal from you. I think the concern at this point, and the reason why transportation staff raised it, is because that avenue will be closed. So like I mentioned before, it could be that we decide that we can't warrant a traffic signal based on, the entitlement that they're going to build. I will say, they do have an entitlement for way more than they're proposed in their site plan. They could build a hotel here and some amount of retail and other stuff through the administrative adjustment to a PD. So, the applicant, I think, is trying to avoid confusion about what they're going to be required to do. And I think staff is concerned that will eliminate any options for them to either request or work through some partnership or require whatever the spectrum is. So I don't know if there is an amount of time that will cause us to, I don't think staff is going to propose that if they commit to a high visibility crosswalk or a traffic signal, that they won't be concerned anymore. I think removing the language that says there will never be right-of-way improvements ever again is really what is the concern here. And again, Isabel and David can speak for themselves, but their argument is that they've done everything that they have committed to do, and nothing else is really warranted based on what they're proposing. I don't know if we'll ever agree to some compromise based on that. But I could be wrong.
Based on that, I might recommend a February 22nd deferral on this case, but I see hands. Commissioner Lampman, your hand was up first, and then Commissioner Bennett.
Yeah, I used to live in this area at the Marshall Park Apartments, and I would walk that relatively frequently. And me being, relatively able-bodied, that was, I found it challenging at times with the traffic. And if you are developing senior housing there, I think it would make sense to at least put in some sort of pedestrian protection. If it's a pedestrian walk or a lighted pedestrian, maybe not a full-blown signal, but I think it's important for this particular area. Again, me being, relatively robust to be able to cross that street just fine when it's relatively busy, but having someone else maybe not as robust to make that crossing. I think it's for the safety of all, I think it's important.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. I think Ira touched on something that I was going to ask, and I just want to make sure I understood what he said, and that is that the site plan can be changed? And if the site plan is changed, would it have to come back to the planning commission to? My concern is that the site plan could be changed to develop something else, but the rezoning has been approved with these very tight conditions. And it's saying that the city can't request any type of infrastructure improvements, but they could change the site plan. I'm asking if that's true.
Yes, ma'am. So UDO section about plan development. So this has a section about what can be changed after approval by council. So that is section 4.7.6, if any of you are fast in your UDO. And that's amendments to a master plan that can be approved by staff. And those are very strict. So an increase or decrease to residential density by 10%, increase or decrease to non-residential square footage by 10%, an increase to height in stories but not in feet. You can transfer some use to another use, minor adjustments to a building. This is a really long paragraph, but so there is some flexibility that staff can approve, based on presuming that, once council approves something, staff then has to have final approval, and there might be technical details that were not considered at that time. Now, so they do have entitlement. They're showing a building footprint. They could move it and the parking spaces somewhat. But they could also use the same building and build whatever their retail entitlement is. Now they have to have the parking for it, and they're not showing a parking structure. So I think there is some reasonableness. You could conclude that, they're one space per unit, they have showing a certain number of spaces. That'll be the sort of natural cap. But they don't have to be age restricted necessarily. They're proposed that, but it could just be, multifamily units. Like I say, there could be a hotel in there. I don't have every scenario of the entitlement compared to what the site plan would let them fit necessarily.
But I think you have to look at the site plan that's attached to the master plan, and what we propose. We can only deviate by 10% of non-residential space. And so we don't show any non-residential. So that would not allow us to do anything. Our units could only go up by 10%, and our building can only move by 100 feet. And our driveways, I don't think, could be moved except for a de minimis. So you really are very locked in when you attach the site plan, which we're required to do.
Yeah, I can't just, I think the changes would probably be minor just based on the other physical things in the site plan that would be hard to change administratively. But there is some possibility. Again, I didn't game out every single potential change that could happen based, on the matrix of allowed administrative approvals versus entitlement. They can move access points. They can move walls, except for walls that are to an area that conflicts with buffering. Et cetera.
Given that, without objection, I'd like to recommend a deferral of this case to February 22nd to allow additional conversation with transportation staff, perhaps considering removing that restriction for future transportation improvements, and then providing additional landscape buffering near the Crabtree Valley Avenue intersection. Commissioner O'Haver?
Thanks, Chair Fox. To confirm the procedural process, so with the new text change, I assume that it doesn't work any differently with the TCZ than it does with the standard rezoning, in that they have one opportunity to come back to present. And so the next time we hear this case, we're going to have to either make a recommendation for approval, denial, or to move it on with no recommendation to council. Am I correct? Do I have that figured out now?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Seeing no objection, we're going to defer that case and move on to item E.2. E.2 is case number Z7721. This is a request to rezone approximately 3.07 acres on Edwards Mill Road from office mixed use 7 stories urban limited conditional use to commercial mixed use 7 stories conditional use. I'd like to start with a staff presentation by Don Belk.
Good morning, Chair Fox, members of the Planning Commission. This is a request to rezone just over 3 acres from the office mixed use to the commercial mixed use. Note that this would result in the removal of the urban limited frontage from the existing zoning. Next slide. The area is predominantly residential. That CX parcel to the west is vacant. The R4 vacant, R4 parcel, I'm sorry, to the west is the Stowe Elementary School. Here's an aerial view. This site is within the Crabtree City Growth Center. You see the adjacency to Crabtree Valley Mall, the elementary school, the Highwoods office complex to the south, and still a considerable amount of low scale and medium scale residential in the area. Closer view showing the configuration of the site and a view from the corner of Edwards Mill Road and Park Lake, looking north. Note Edwards Mill to the east northeast there in that photo, and below a photo of the Park Lake Avenue streetscape facing southeast. There are a number of proposed conditions here, 11 in total. I won't read them all. I'll just mention that the intent behind the prohibition of many of these CX uses, it was the intent of the applicant to remove as many of those uses as possible to get back as close to the initial OX zoning and uses as possible. Note 2, number 3, they have limited the height of any standalone retail or restaurant at the site. Next slide. Limiting hours of operation, prohibiting drive-throughs. They are providing a 70-foot wide buffer at the boundary next to the Martinique condominium development. And also providing a building height step down at that location as well. Condition number 8 is some details about the principal building facade. The applicant has, this is part of their intent to replicate a hybrid frontage at this location. So this, some specifics about the facade on condition number 8. And next slide. Condition number 9 as well, which is characteristic of the parking limited frontage. And also some details, condition number 10 and 11, both provide some details on any parking structure at the site. And this is intended to meet the guidance of the Crabtree area plan for parking structures. And the next slide, you see a continuation of the details and specifics of the materials for screening of that parking structure should one be developed there. And the next slide shows condition 11, which deals with the illumination of said parking structure. Next slide, please. Comparison between existing and proposed zoning. Note the increase in the residential density there and the maximum number of units. Setbacks remain the same. And the office entitlement remains more or less the same. There is a substantial increase in the retail square footage entitlement. The proposal scores highly in our transportation and energy analysis, checking the higher scores in all of these categories. It is served by transit, Route 26, Edwards Mill. In the affordability analysis, it does add to the housing supply and checks the boxes for the variety of housing types that lead to a more affordable product. However, the proposal does not include subsidized units. A note here in our demographics and land use history analysis that these demographic indicators are substantially higher than the city average. We found no restrictive covenants that restrict development beyond requirements in this location. The request is inconsistent with the future land use map, which does recommend office and residential mixed use at this location. We found that the proposed conditions for the hybrid frontage, we consider this to be at least partially inconsistent with the urban form because of the existing urban limited frontage, which does have some more stringent standards for sidewalk width, for example. So that led us to this determination on urban form. Number of consistent policies. Note the key policies here, as one would expect in a mixed-use center. They have paid much attention to the buffering requirements to the adjoining residential, and as previously mentioned, the building height transition there, scale and design and infill. And we talked about the meeting the guidance of the Crabtree area plan on parking structures. These inconsistent policies that we're noting, as you can see, are really all related, other than the flume inconsistency. These are related to the change from or the removal of the urban limited frontage that's in the existing zoning, and we felt that the hybrid frontage that the applicant is providing for in the conditions did not meet that same standard. So that is why these policies were deemed inconsistent. The proposal is consistent, however, overall with the comprehensive plan, as noted, the flume inconsistency and the partial inconsistency with urban form. Your deadline for action will be March 26th. And I would note too that this proposal, if approved, would result in an amendment to the future land use map, changing it from office and residential mixed use to community mixed use. I'll be happy to answer any questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox, members of the Planning Commission. Chad Essig with Pointer Sproul, 301 Fayetteville Street, Suite 1900. Here this morning on behalf of Highwoods Properties, the property owner and developer of the Glen Lake Office Park. Joining me this morning from Highwoods is Skip Hill, Senior Vice President and Raleigh Market Leader, as well as Jeff Emerson, Director of Pre-Development. And we also have Carrie Goforth, Project Architect with 505 Design. Don did a nice job summarizing, so I'll try not to be too redundant. Next slide, please. So as you can see on this aerial, this property outlined in red is located along what we call Old Edwards Mill Road at the intersection with Park Lake Avenue, kind of generally west of Crabtree Valley Mall. The property is located within the Glen Lake Office Park, which is an entirely Highwoods developed project that was originally rezoned in 2006 to accommodate the office park development. To the north and the east is the Martinique condominium community, and then north across Edwards Mill is the Camden Manor Creek Apartments. To the west across Park Lake Avenue is also Highwoods owned property we refer to as Glen Lake 3. That aerial shows it as being vacant, but it has an approved site plan and is currently under development. Further to the west, there is Stow Elementary. And then to the south is the remainder of the Glen Lake Office Park, which totals 5 office buildings, all owned and operated by Highwoods, totaling more than 700,000 square feet of office. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the property is currently zoned, like the majority of Glen Lake, OX7, urban limited conditional use. The Martinique condominiums to the north there, R10. And then Glen Lake 3, which I mentioned just a moment ago, across Park Lake Avenue, is zoned CX12 conditional use. And that was rezoned in 2018. We amended those conditions in 2020, really to allow some retail and restaurant uses to be located outside the ground floor along Park Lake Avenue, to help provide for some greater amenities for the office park users and the nearby residents. As I mentioned, that site, the CX12 site, is currently under development for about 200,000 square feet of office and between 12 and 13,000 square feet of retail restaurant uses along Park Lake Avenue. Similarly to this case, when that rezoning was done, we removed the urban limited frontage and addressed urban form and through our zoning conditions. So this triangular site that we're talking about today, just over 3 acres, and is really the last piece to be developed within the Glen Lake Office Park. And as it stands now, under the existing zoning, it could be developed, for another 50,000 square feet of additional office space or multifamily, ranging anywhere from 4 to 6 stories under the existing zoning conditions. But in evaluating, what's the best use of this remaining parcel, Highwoods, not too dissimilar from what they're trying to do across the street at Glen Lake 3, really wanted to create amenities for people within the office park. And they're looking at on this site kind of a brewery restaurant concept that would give office park users as well as nearby restaurants a walkable place to go to lunch, dinner, grab a drink after work, all without having to get in their car and go to Crabtree Valley or somewhere else. So in order to accommodate that, obviously the existing OX would not allow that sort of standalone use. So that's what's driving this request from the OX to the CX. As Don noted, we are requesting it CX7 conditional use, but we are carrying over many of the existing zoning conditions that were put in place in 2006 regarding buffering, height transitions, and then we've also provided additional conditions to mimic many of the standards in the OX district and to further address urban form. Next slide. Next slide. So I won't go through all of these zoning conditions. I think Don touched on them. I will just talk briefly about, removal of that urban limited frontage. We have removed that as part of the rezoning. I will note that that designation was applied to the Glen Lake Office Park in 2015 when the city did their remapping, well after much of the streetscape and the office park had already been designed and constructed. Highwoods is very committed to providing walkability to this site, not just for its office users, but the nearby residents. But the urban limited frontage applied some real challenges to this triangular shaped lot that has a lot of frontage, both on Park Lake and Old Edwards Mill Road. Primarily, meeting the 50% building percentage within the build-to area would result in us having to construct a very long, large, and kind of skinny L-shaped building that's just not feasible for the site or really the intended use that we're looking to do here. But as Don noted, to address the removal of that, we have proposed zoning conditions that would push the principal building and the outdoor amenity area closer to that intersection of Park Lake Avenue and Old Edwards Mill Road. We limit parking between the building and Park Lake to a single drive aisle and 2 bays of parking, and then also require that direct pedestrian access from the building to the public sidewalk along Park Lake Avenue. Very similar to what a parking limited frontage would call for, which is consistent, what we believe is also consistent frontage for a growth area like this. We would still be installing, sidewalks along Park Lake Avenue and Old Edwards Mill Road and extending the existing streetscape that's already been developed to provide a continuity within the existing office park, similar to what we're already doing across the street at Glen Lake 3. If I'll to be candid, we want that building to be, right at the corner, to activate that corner. And, actually don't have plans to have any parking between the principal building and Park Lake. But given some of the site constraints I mentioned and the shape of the lot, we just want to have flexibility during the site plan process and not, box ourselves in too much on the zoning conditions. But that is certainly our intent and what Highwoods wants to do with this site. We did incorporate, we don't believe there'll be any structured parking on the site, but as Don noted, we have included conditions based on the Urban Design Center's recommendations for parking structure, screening, and lighting. So we did have a neighborhood meeting. There were several folks that attended from the Martinique condominiums. We heard a lot of excitement from them about having some additional amenity options instead of, another or an additional office building on this site. They were pleased that we were maintaining that 75-foot undisturbed buffer along the property line that we had committed to in 2006. And so, we're excited about this project. I'm not aware of anyone that signed up to speak in opposition today. I do want to reserve a little bit of time. I think Mr. Glenn Roberts, who's the Martinique HOA president, is on the line, and wanted to give him a chance to speak real quickly. But with that, of course, I'm happy to answer any questions. And we would respectfully ask the Planning Commission to recommend approval of this case.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Glenn Roberts. I've owned property at 4701 Edwards Mill Road in Martinique since 2014. During that period, I've seen a lot of investment in the Glen Lake area and development, and they've done a great job in what they've been doing. Been wonderful neighbors. Recently, I had to have some of my parking lots repaved, and Highwoods was nice enough to let my residents park over there. So we've had a really good relationship through the years. I've met with Skip, I've met with Chad, and we've talked about this a lot. I've talked to members of my board, and we have no objection to this. I think the retail is a great idea. I think it'd be an amenity to our community to be over, if there was that bar or restaurant, some retail where our residents could walk to it versus, going down to the mall. So I am very much in favor for this. I'm excited. We're going to keep that buffer. Those are my, my concerns, and we've discussed that, and the noise ordinance. And, as long as we move forward with what, we've discussed, I have no objections to this proposal at all. And I think it would actually be an improvement for everyone. So I request, that you guys go ahead and approve this. I think it's a better fit for Martinique than a 7-story office building backing up that some of my residents got to look at all the time. So I'm very much in support of this project.
Thank you for your comments. Just want to check with the moderator. Do we have any other members of the public signed up to speak on this item?
I think that's it outside of the applicant team.
Okay. Then I'd like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any members of the commission have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion. Commissioner O'Haver.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval. I move to recommend adoption of proposed consistency statement dated January 25th, 2022, containing the agenda materials and a recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement. After considering the policies, maps, and other materials included as a part of the comprehensive plan, I believe the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan and other adopted plans. And while inconsistent with the future land use map, I do believe that it is consistent with the development pattern in that area and should be approved. The action taken is reasonable and in the public interest for a number of reasons. Capitalizing on transit access, reinforcing the urban pattern, the buffering requirements, scale and design of new commercial uses, just as well as, again, I do think with the urban growth map back from, I think Dean and Commissioner Raines and Commissioner Daltell can speak to the build to on those triangular patterns, very challenging. So the urban growth issue does not concern me, and absolutely providing additional amenities in there will reduce traffic trips. So.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Haver. And Commissioner Rains, is that a second?
Second.
Commissioner O'Haver has offered a motion to approve Z7721. Commissioner Rains has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Okay, seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dartell,
Aye.
Commissioner Elder,
Aye.
Chair Fox,
Aye.
Commissioner Godinez,
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver,
Aye.
and Commissioner Rains.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item E.3, which is case number Z8621. This is a request to rezone approximately 0.93 acres on Rock Drive and Pool Road from residential 4 to residential 6. I'd like to start with a staff presentation from John Anagnost.
Good morning. This is Z-86-21. This is 2 lots in the Riverview Estates subdivision on the north side of Pool Road. This is east of New Hope Road and west of the Neuse River. And most of this area is currently zoned residential 4. You can see a small area of residential mixed use to the southeast. That is a Wake County Public Schools property and is likely to become a school in the future. The larger area, you can see the Neuse River passes this neighborhood on its north side and then wraps around to the east side of this neighborhood and crosses Pool Road. And there is a greenway trail constructed there that is accessible from Jeffrey Street. So a pretty quick walk or bike ride from this site to the Neuse River Greenway Trail. Otherwise, primarily residential in this area. I will note the presence of the tow yard on the south side of Pool Road, just opposite this site. Another thing to note in this area is Pool Road is the subject of a widening project by the city currently that is going to add lanes as well as a median. And so when that median is constructed, left turns will not be allowed out of Rock Drive onto Pool Road. But it will add a sidewalk on one side and a multi-use path on the other side of Pool Road. Here you can see a little closer. So the site has been cleared. It's currently being used as parking. Here you can see closer images of the site. There are no conditions. It's a general use request. And the expected potential yield for this proposal to residential 6 is a single additional unit, which would be facilitated by the ability to construct townhouses, which are currently not allowed. This area has a low walk score, not many destinations nearby, but a pretty decent bike score due to the adjacency to the Greenway Trail. It is a low transit score, but there is transit service within a walking distance. There's a route that has a stop just west of this site on Pool Road. But again, not many destinations nearby. That is an hourly transit service. So most travel here is probably going to either be by vehicle or an hourly transit service. And here you can see that route and the location of that nearest stop. And so that trip to that stop will be much safer and more comfortable once the widening project is complete and there is a pedestrian facility in between this site and the transit stop. So this would add a very marginally small amount to the housing supply potential in this area, would increase the variety of housing types allowed, and would allow smaller lots. This area does display a higher proportion of residents of color than Raleigh in general, as well as a higher number of folks that earn low incomes and who have less than a high school education, so potentially benefits of additional housing supply and variety for existing residents. This neighborhood, the Riverview Estates, was subject to restrictive covenants that sets of minimum setbacks and house sizes. Those covenants expired in the 1980s, but that is, part of, aside from the zoning, adding potentially to the lot size and home size here. So the future land use map calls for low-scale residential in this area. The number of units combined with the types of building types that are allowed is likely to produce a type of development that fits into the recommendation of low-scale residential and is compatible with existing development nearby. There is no urban form guidance here, and this case is evaluated as consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map policies related to housing and compatibility with existing residential development. No inconsistent policies were identified, and your deadline for action is March the 26th. I can take any questions.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Hi, great morning. How is everyone?
Good morning.
Okay, hi. If I sound a little winded right now, I do apologize. I do volunteer with the food bank, so I am currently in the midst of that. So I'm just trying to take a break and get through this real quick. So pardon me. So we're looking to develop. We acquired this site mid last year for the purpose of developing 10 townhomes. I don't have a lot of slides, only this one, which is the potential site layout. I did speak to John on last week, and he did inform me at that time that we possibly would only be able to do 9 townhomes instead of 10. So this layout is going to slightly change. However, we wanted to keep the overall look. He also did let me know that we possibly would not be able to have a turnout onto Pool Road because of how the widening project is going and the medians and the other things that they're putting in. And only other thing I wanted to add is that we're also in the process of annexing the property as well for water and sewer. So we were basically just trying to, being that the widening project is going on at this point, we were trying to hopefully get some of these things resolved as far as rezoning and annexing. Because, if they're going to dig the road up and widen it, we didn't want to run into the issue of having to go back and redig it up again. So some of these things are just time sensitive for us. I understand the process is the process. But that's all I have to say, and I want to thank you all for your time.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to verify there are no members of the public signed up to speak on this.
We have no signups.
Okay, so we can shift to questions and comments from commissioners. Do any members have any questions or comments? If so, please be recognized to speak. Seeing no questions, I would like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Miller?
Thank you. I move to approve zoning case Z8621 and to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated January 25th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials.
And Commissioner Bennett, is that a second?
Second, sorry.
No worries. Commissioner Miller has offered a motion to approve Z8621. Commissioner Bennett has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Daltell?
Aye.
Commissioner Elder,
Aye.
Chair Fox,
Aye.
Commissioner Godinez,
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver,
Aye.
Commissioner Raines.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. That concludes all the discussion items on our agenda, and next is the approval of the minutes. The draft minutes for the January 11 Virtual Planning Commission meeting are included in the backup. Are there any edits or comments related to the minutes? Seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from January 11. Commissioner Miller?
I move to approve the meeting minutes contained in the agenda materials.
And do we have a second? Commissioner Raines?
Second.
And now I will ask for a show of hands to record the individual votes, and I will announce the outcome of the vote. Those in favor of approving the minutes from the January 11, 2022 Virtual Planning Commission meeting, show of hands. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to other business, I have no report today. And next is a report of the members. Do any members have a report they would like to share? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. Just a reminder that the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee will be meeting on Thursday, and we'll be meeting at 2:30 instead of 3. We have 2 agenda items to discuss.
Excellent, thank you. That's a good reminder. After Infrastructure and Mobility would be the Committee of the Whole on Thursday, the 27th, and that would start at 4. Are there any other reports of members? Commissioner Elder?
Hi, I just wanted to let the committee know that, or the commission know that I'm probably missing the next couple of meetings. I'm expecting my second child next week, so I anticipate missing a couple of meetings. Hopefully I'll be back in March.
Excellent, congratulations, Commissioner Elder. If there are no other reports, I will move on to the report of the Deputy Planning Director, Mr. Bowers.
Sure, just an update from the city council. You sent 4 zoning cases to them at their last meeting, and all of them have been scheduled for public hearing on March 1st. And then a lingering zoning case, C6820, which was at Bagwell Avenue and Hillsborough Street, was in committee, got reported out, was heard at public hearing a week ago, and is held open. Expect further revisions to the case before the council acts. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. Apologies, Commissioner Lampman, did I miss your hand earlier during report?
Thank you. I was just going to mention that we have a strategic planning committee on February 10th at 4 p.m. There we'll be going over the planning process. The intention there is to help aid perhaps new members of the process and others of the community. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Okay, seeing none, that concludes this meeting of the Planning Commission. Thank you, everyone.